Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to create a simple iOS 9 app, which is the first iOS 9 app on this channel, and we're going to use the Xcode 7 Beta 3 version and of course the Swift 2.0 syntax for this tutorial. And I'm going to introduce you to one of the new cool APIs in iOS 9, which is the Spotlight search, and therefore we're going to create a cool quotes app that lets you store all of your favorite quotes. So as you can see, I've already entered 2 quotes here, and once I hit the plus button I can enter something like the test quote whatsoever by me and hit save, and there it is. And as you can see here, I have already created a quote by James T. Kirk, and if I go back to the home screen and search for Kirk, then you can see that our top hit is this search result from our app, which is the quote from James T. Kirk. And once I click on that search result, we will directly be moved into our application and the quote that we searched for is displayed. But before we get started, I'd like to show you a new app that I have released some days ago. It is called Notes to Go, and I created it because I felt the need for myself to have a notes application that is more beautiful than the iOS Notes app, even the Notes app that comes with iOS 9, and also a way that lets me store notes directly into Evernote once I have created them on the go, because Evernote feels a little too complicated for me as I'm on the way. And so this is what that's a result of my problem. And as you can see, it gives you quite a nice way to display notes. You can create to-do lists, you can add locations, photos, and so on. And you have also the possibility to select specific notes so that they can be displayed on your Apple Watch. And also you have on your Apple Watch you have a button that lets you mark a spot, so as soon as you hit that button on your Apple Watch, the location your current location will be transferred to your iPhone, and you can then add specific notes to that location. And of course you can export all of these notes to your to a specific Evernote notebook. And if you're interested in this application, you will find a promo code link in the video description, so be quick to get this app for free if you like it. And if you feel the need, you can of course give this a review on the iTunes store. So now let's start and open up Xcode and create a new project. It's going to be a single view application, so let's hit next, and we will call this Swift quote. Just let me remove that from the desktop here. It's going to be called Swift quote, and hit next and create that file or that project on the desktop, and then we are ready to go. So first of all, we are going to start off in the main storyboard, and we will not use this standard view controller here, so we will go ahead and delete this view controller. And once we did that, we will search for a table view controller here and bring that up. And again, we will use another table view controller, which we can also already position here in our storyboard. And once we did that, we have to embed this first table view controller into a navigation controller so that we can get this behavior that you have just seen in Swift quote. So once we click on that, we are transitioning to this table view controller, and we go back and we have this nice navigation bar here at the top. And this can be achieved by embedding this first table view controller into a navigation controller. And to do that, we will select this first table view controller, click on the editor button here at the top, and select embed in a navigation controller. And here we go. There is our navigation controller with the table view controller attached to it. And since we have deleted the initial view controller that was that was given to us by the single view application template, we will have to select this navigation controller, and in the attributes inspector here at the top right, we will select this is the initial view controller, which will give us a little arrow here at the left side of this navigation controller, and this indicates that this is the starting point for our application. So here we are. Here is our table view controller, our first table view controller. Here's our second table view controller. And now we will just do the basic setup. So as you have seen, we will just call this first table view controller quotes, which will be the heading here. And we will also add a bar button item, which will let us a transition to this second table view controller so that we can create a new quote. And once I have brought up the bar button item to my navigation bar here at the top, what I want to do is go back here to the attributes inspector with this bar button item selected, and I want to choose as a system item add, which gives us this nice plus button. And to make a connection between this table view controller and the second table view controller, we can simply click, we press Control on the keyboard and click and drag to the second table view controller, and we will select show as our action segue. So this is the segue that is going to automatically initiate the transition once we click on the plus button here. And as you have seen, we already got now this navigation bar here at the top because we have created this segue. And now when I run the application in the simulator, you can see that we have quotes here, and I press on the plus button and we are switching. We can switch between those two table view controllers without writing a single line of code. And this is a pretty nice feature. So once we did that, we can now move on to customizing this second table view controller. And there is a basic difference between those two table view controllers in our application. If you have watched carefully, you can see that here we actually have something that can be dragged around, but there are not many cells actually. And this is because this is not a dynamic table view. It is a static table view which has a so-called grouped layout. So we will select this table view here on our second table view controller. And what we want to do now is first of all choose the style as being grouped, which gives us this this different layout. And also we do not want dynamic prototypes, we want static cells. So now that we have this group layout with static cells, we can define different sections here in the outliner. And first of all, I want to remove the second and the third table view cell and give this first section a header, which is going to be the quote itself. So this is the space where we will let the user enter his quote. And now we will select the table view itself again and add another section. So we just hit the arrow up button and we get a copy of the first section. And in this case, we do not want this to be the quote, it should be the author. So here we go. And then we will just bring up some nice user interface elements to these two groups. So first of all, we will add a text view, which lets us add multiple lines of text. We'll just bring that up and put it into this content view here and align this a little. So just like that, maybe increase the font size to 16, and then we can just remove the text here. And what we also want to do to make this app working on different screen sizes for different iPhone models, we want to set the the auto layout constraints that will automatically adjust the size of this UI element to its container. So to do that, we will press Control on the keyboard and click drag to the table view's content view. And we will now press Shift on the keyboard and select leading space, trailing space, top space, and bottom space. So we get those 4 constraints, which will be, once you press Enter, also be visible on the here in the interface builder. And once you see that all lines are blue when you're setting auto layout constraints, that means that your constraints are satisfying auto layout itself. So this is going to work. And now we will also make this a little bigger here, and we will also add a UI text field to this second grouped table view cell. Make this a little bigger, and this is going to be the text field where the user will enter the author of the quote. So and we will have to supply this text field with auto layout constraints as well. So again, click drag to the content view and select the leading space, trailing space, top space, and bottom space, and hit enter. And now we again have all 4 constraints that will make sure that the size of both the text view and the text field to be exactly the correct size for different screen sizes, from iPhone 4S up to the iPhone 6 Plus. So now that we have this basic user interface already set up, what we also want to do is add another bar button item. So let's enter that here and bring that up to our second view controller. And you will notice that this bar button item will not automatically be put into the navigation bar. We have to do that ourselves, but we can make some adjustments here as well. This is going to be a save button. So here we are, and this is going to be our user interface. And now, once we have a look and run this again, you see there is our interface. Looks pretty nice already, but the save button is missing. Now, to enable our application to handle some program logic, we will have to supply it with the appropriate Swift classes. And to do so, we will have a look at the already existing classes, which is appdelegate.swift and the viewcontroller.swift. And since we are going to use table view controllers, and this is a simple view controller, we are going to get rid of that file, viewcontroller.swift, and simply delete it by right-clicking on it and hit delete. And we want to move it to trash. So now we click on the app delegate and press Command N to create a new Cocoa Touch class, which is going to be the overview of our quotes. But now notice that we do not want to create a subclass of UI view controller. We want to create a subclass of UI table view controller, and we click next and create that file. And also what we can do now is create the quote table view controller class. So again, press Command N, select the Cocoa Touch class, hit next, and this is going to be the quote table view controller. So next and create. And in order for these files to be connected with the interface builder representations of those view controllers, of these table view controllers, we have to select both ones. So this quotes table view controller, so we'll click on the table view controller symbol here at the top. We change here to the identity inspector and select as a custom class, in this case, the overview table view controller, and in this case, we select the quote table view controller. And to be able to see something so that we can display any quotes here in our overview, we should first be able to create quotes. So this makes it a pretty simple decision to start our coding efforts here in the quote table view controller. And so that we can work with the with those different UI elements, we have to create the outlets for the specific for the specific UI element. So we'll start with the quote text view. So what we want to do is bring up this assistant editor, which gives us a split screen. On the left side we have the storyboard, and on the right side we have our code window, and with the correct Swift class selected already. So we have the quote table view controller here, and this is also our quote table view controller. And I will again press Control on my keyboard and click drag to my Swift class here, and we will create an outlet connection now, which is going to be called quote text view. And let's do the same with the text field here, which is the author text field, and also with the save button. So this is going to be the save button. Let me select it. You can also click drag from the outliner here. So this is going to be the save button. And in this case, I also want to create an action for this button. So because once you hit it, we want to save our quote. So again, press Control on your keyboard, click drag from this from the outliner or from the table view controller itself. And now we will select action instead of outlet and call this just save quote and connect. And there is our IB action. And now that we have all these things in place, we will switch to the standard editor. And first of all, we have to get rid of some code here. This code that is green, which is commented out, was provided by the table view controller template. So we will simply remove that. And since we do not have a dynamic table view cells, we can also delete the table view data source methods here, which is number of sections, and also the table view number of rows in section. We can both delete all of that. And now, first of all, to get our bar button item with the save button in place, what we want to do is remove all the lines of code here in the view.load function and remove those slashes to remove that comment. And now, as you can see here, we have self.navigation_item.write bar button item, and we can simply remove the edit button item and replace that now with the save button. And when we now run the application again, you can see that here we've got our save button. And now that we are all set with the user interface, let's think about the way we can actually store quotes on the device. We won't use a database, so we won't use core data. We won't upload them to a third-party cloud service or anything like it, which means that we need to find a way to store our quotes and the author on the device. We could either save them in a text file, for example, but this is a little hard to process. So another very easy way is to store this kind of information in a plist, in a property list that looks actually just like the info plist that comes with every Xcode project. So once I open that up as source code, you can see that this is a simple XML structure. But we won't deal with this kind of XML structure. Actually, we will use a very handy method by the NS mutable dictionary class. That is a standard Cocoa class, and we will create such a plist for our application. And to do so, the first thing we need is an actual file name for this plist. So let's create at the top of our file a property in our quote table view controller class, which we're going to call quote list name. And this is going to get the name of our plist, which is quote list.plist, which is the file extension for a property list. And when we're working with that kind of data, we will also need this this Cocoa class, which is going to be our quote dictionary, and this is of the type NS mutable dictionary. So it needs to be mutable because we want to make changes. If we didn't want to make changes, it wouldn't have to be mutable. But this class will provide us with a method that lets us store plists without having to deal with XML file structure. So this is one thing we will need for our data model, and the other thing we will need is going to be a quote list. So this is going to be an array. So we are going to use brackets here to specify an array, and the array will store a list of dictionaries, which is now a standard Swift dictionary, with a key and a value of the type string, and we will then initialize that using some parentheses. And the quote list will actually hold all the quotes that we have stored, and the quote dictionary will be the container for the quote list itself, and this container will allow us to save all the data to a plist. So now that we have all the properties we need, we can go back to our save quote function here, and let me make some space here, and we will start right after the function definition. And what we will need to do is first of all create a path where we want to store our quote list, and we want to store this in the documents directory of the user's iPhone in our sandbox, of course, and therefore we will use the NS search path for directory in domains, and we will need to specify a directory and a domain mask. So we'll use NS search path directory, which is going to be the document directory, and the NS search path domain mask, which is going to be the user domain mask, which corresponds to the user's home directory. And let's set this to true, and let's move on. Since this method returns a array of strings, we will need to access the first element of that string to get the base path for our documents folder. So we'll use the path and access its index 0. And now that we have the base path, we can actually define the complete quote list path, which is going to be the base path, and we will simply append our file name. So we're going to use the string by appending path component method here, and we will append the quote list name, which we have defined here as a property. So this is where we are going to store our information. Now we have to compile our information, or our data, which will comprise of a quote and the author. And therefore we are going to write a simple function which we'll call getQuote. And this will not get any parameters, but it will return a dictionary with the same configuration as we specified in the quote list. So we will have a dictionary with a key and a value of strings, and this is what we are going to return. So we'll first of all define a quote as a dictionary with string key value pair, and as you can see here, this is another way to initialize a dictionary with brackets and a colon here, which separates the key and the value, and we initialize it with these parentheses. And now we check if the quote text view and its text property is not equal to an empty string, so if the user has entered a quote, and the same thing for the author text field and its text property. But let me just show you something here. As you can see here, this property is optional, so what we need to do later, if we want to use it, is to unwrap this value. At the moment we would not have to do that, but we will come to that in a second. So both the quote text view and the author text field are not empty if we are in this in this line now. If we reach this line, we know that the user has entered a quote and an author. And then we can add a key value pair or some key value pairs to our quote dictionary. First of all, we will add the quote itself, the colon to separate the key from the value, and in this case the value is the content of the text view, and the second key value pair is going to be the author, which is our key, and now the author text field dot text, and this property unwrapped with an exclamation mark. All right, and now that we have created a quote dictionary, what we need to do is return this quote as we stated it in our method definition here. And now that we have this get quote method, we can go back to our save quote method, and we can think about the way we would like to add the quote we just created to our quote list, so to our array of quotes or our array of dictionaries. So therefore we will use the quote list and append a new element, and we get the new element or the new quote by calling get quote, and thereby we will simply append a new element to our array, and this new element is going to be the quote that the user just entered. So now that we have updated our quote list, what we actually need to do now is put this quote list into our quote dictionary. So we use the quote dictionary, specify a key for which we want to store our quote list, and the key is going to be quotes, and then we will set this the value for this key is going to be our quote list. So now we have created a dictionary that can be stored in the documents folder, and to really do that we will use the quotes dictionary and write it to file. And this is the very convenient method that I talked about earlier. This writes a property list representation of the contents of the dictionary to a given path. So, and now we will use our quote list path that we have created and set automatically to true, and this now allows us to write a plist to the user's document directory. The problem at the moment, however, is that we can't really work with the code we have just written because the quote dictionary is not yet existent. Since we haven't wrote anything into the file, we don't know if it really exists. We do not know what its contents are. We do not know if the quote list has some values or whatever. So this means we have to put some safety code in here, and we will do that first of all in view.load. So when our second view controller, our quote table view controller loads, or when it did load, we will check if the quotes dictionary is not equal to nil. So if it is already set, because we will set the we will give this a value before before this quote table view controller is going to appear, and then what we can do is fill the quote list with the already existing quotes that have already been stored to our plist, which is at the moment not yet, which does not exist at the moment. So let's use the quotes dictionary and access its quotes key, and then cast that to a array of dictionaries with strings as key and values. And this is what we need here at the moment in view.load, and what we also need to do here in the SafeQuote method before we really use the quotes dictionary. What we really need to do is check if we need to do the same thing if the quotes dict is nil at the moment here, which means that it has not yet been initialized with values from our overview table view controller. Then we need to create, or we need to initialize the quotes dict before we can use it. So we will initialize it using the NS mutable dictionary constructor, and this should actually do it. And now that this works, we can actually have a look at the overview table view controller, and there we can think about how to load the data that we want to display. And as you can see, we have here a lot of template code, which we will use in that case, because we need the number of sections in table view, which is going to be 1. And we will also give this 1 row at the moment, and we will also remove the comments here from the self-row at index path method, and because we will need them to create the cells for our overview. And we will also set this identifier to cell, which means that we have to go back into our main storyboard and select the quotes table view, and in the overview table view controller. And as you can see, we have not yet connected. Oh, we have connected. That's all right. So we have to select the table view cell and give this table view cell in the attributes inspector a identifier, which is going to be cell. And also the style is going to be subtitle, so that we can actually have a quote and an author in the same cell without doing anything. As you can see, we have now a title and a subtitle for our table view cell, which is quite handy. And now that this is done, we can go back to our overview table view controller and have a look at the view.load method, where we will remove all of the template code, and we will simply call a load data function here, which we're going to write right beneath the view.load method. And what load data does is actually pretty similar to what our save method does here, just the other way around. So what we can do when we go back to our quote table view controller Swift file, we can actually copy these lines of code here and just paste them into the load data function in the overview table view controller. And of course, we will also have to copy the quote list name from our properties here at the top and insert that here at the top as well. And now that we have, again, the quote list path, what we can do is first of all check if our quote list exists, and therefore we are going to use the NS file manager and the default manager, and then we will simply check file exists at path, and there we will use our quote list path. So, and if this file exists, we will use our quote dictionary, which we can also copy from here. Yep, our quote dictionary. So I'm going to copy that, paste that here. And now we can fill this quote dictionary by using the NS mutable dictionary class and initialize it with contents of file. And there we can simply state the quotes dictionary. And the quote list path as the file path to initialize our quote dictionary. And now we can also create a quote list, actually, or we can also call it quotes here, which is also going to be an array of dictionaries with string as a key and a string as a value and initialize it directly. And what we will, this is actually the same as the quote list in the quotes table view controller. And what we do here is simply, again, accessing the quote dictionary and using the quotes key to fill it with all the quotes that we have already stored, and cast that again as a dictionary of with string key value pairs. And all we need to do now is reload the table view. So self.tableview.reload data. This is going to reload the table view, and now we will also go to our number of rows in section, where we now can state that we want that the number of rows is going to correspond with the number of quotes we have in our array. So our quotes array here will store all the quotes we have, and the number of rows in section is corresponding with the count of this this array. And now that we have this in place, what we can do is creating our cells. So let's remove the comment here where it says configure cell, and we will first of all create a quote object, which is going to be very easy to initialize, because we only have to use the quotes array and then use the index path.row to specify the index of our quotes quote, or the quote that we want to display. And then we can configure the cell by using the text label property and its text, and set this to the quote with the key quote. And for the author, we will use the detail text label and its text property, and set this to quote, and the key is author. All right, and that's it actually. And now we can give this a try. And we should, but what we also should do is add another method here at the top, which is view did appear, and then we will have to call the super class, and also call super view did appear, and give this the parameter that is stated here. And then again we need to call our load data function, and then we really can give this a try. So we click the plus button, I write test quote by test, and the author is also test. I click save and go back, and there it is. So this is already great. We can display our quotes, we can save quotes, but before we move on to displaying them again and even change them, let me just explain why we made this call of view did appear. This is because we want to display the newly created quote as soon as we come back from our quote table view controller. And view.load is only called once, so we have to call load data again when we return from the second table view controller. And now that we that we know that, and we have everything in place, we can actually think about how to display a quote again. And therefore we will create a second segue. Therefore we will select the cell in the outliner here, and press control on the keyboard, and then drag it to our second table view controller and hit show, and then we get another segue, which will have and we need to give that an identifier, as well as this one should have an identifier. So this one is the segue that will be used when the user pushes the plus button, and this one is going to be used as soon as the user selects a table view cell. So this one is going to be show, let's call it show quote, or let's call it create quote, and this one is going to be display quote. All right, and now we have to distinguish between those two segues. And to do that, we will use another quite handy function that has already been created for us, and we have to do that in the overview table view controller class, and we will remove the comments at the bottom, and let's also remove all that stuff here because we don't need that. And this method, the prepare for segue, gives us the opportunity to make some adjustments to what happens when we transition from the first view controller to the second. So let's remove the comments here, give us some space here. And the first thing, in this case, what you need to do is create an instance of your second view controller, which is in our case the quote view controller. And to initialize it, we will use the segue parameter that we already have here, and then select the destination view controller property. And then we need to cast that to a quote table view controller. With that being done, we can now distinguish between the two different segues. So we can again use the segue parameter and use its identifier property and check if we currently use the create quote segue, which would be the plus button. And if this is the case, we will have to check if the quote dict is not equal to nil. So if there is content in it, what we can do is use the quote dictionary and use the quote view controller that we have just created and set its quote dictionary to the quote dict that we have initialized in this first view controller. And if in the other case, else if our segue and its identifier is equal to display quote, we have to do some other things because, well, first of all, we also need to set the quote VC's quote dict to the quote dict of this view controller. But what we also need to do is give it the quote that has been selected, and therefore we will have to create a quote to display actually in our quote table view controller. So let's go back to our quote table view controller and create another property, which is going to be the quote to display. It's also going to be a dictionary with string key value pair, and we can directly initialize it here. And let's also add another property, which is going to be the quote index, which we will use to identify the correct quote that we want to save to our plist later again. So let's return back to our overview table view controller and to our prepare for segue with identifier method. And now that we have these new properties created, we can do some more things. So first of all, we need to get the index path of the cell the user just tapped. So we will create an index path object and simply use self.tableview.index path for selected row. Don't ask me why you don't get code completion here, but I guess it's because we are still in the beta version of Xcode 7. But now, since we have the index path, we can again use our quote VC and set the quote to display to a dictionary from our quotes list. So we will use our quotes array and use our index path to access the correct index, which is going to be index path.row. Let's unwrap that. And what we also can do is set the quote VC and its quote index to the index path.row. And now that we have those two properties set, we can go back to the quote table view controller and also make some changes to the load to our view.load method here. At the moment, we're just loading the quote list from our quote dictionary, but what we can do as well now is we can check if there is a quote to display and to see if something is in this dictionary. We can simply access its quote key and check if it is not equal to nil. So if this is the case, we can use our quote text view and its text property and set it to the quote to display and access it by using, first of all, the quote key. And let's do the same thing for the author text field.text and access the quote display dictionary with the author key. All right, and that should do it for now. Let's run our app for the first time again and see if this works. And there we go. We have clicked on our test quote and the quote is displayed. Now, in order for this to work, so that we can make changes here and hit save again, we need to make some final adjustments actually. So we go down to the save quote method again, and we check before we append our quote to our quote list array, we check if there is a quote to display, and again access the quote key, and if this is not equal to nil, so if there is a quote to display, what we want to do is, using our quote list, access it with the quote index that we have and replace it with get quote, so that we actually update the quote as a specific index. And in the other case, so if there is no quote to update really, so if this is a new quote, what we want to do is actually the same as we did before. We want to append a new quote to our quote list, but we will later use the quote index for the Spotify search. So we also need to update the quote index itself, and therefore we will set this to the quote list and its count, which is the number of quotes, but to get the index of this new quote, we will have to subtract 1, since we're in the indexing begins at 0. And what we can also do here at the bottom, after we have saved our file, I think we could also use the navigation controller and call pop view controller animated, so that our view controller disappears as soon as we hit the save button. And now let's give this a try again. We will click or press the test quote button, the test quote cell, and I will simply add 2 here. I hit save, and as you can see now, the 2 appears here. We can add a second quote, author is Brian. Let's save that, and there's our second quote. Let's make an adjustment here at the advent. And here we go. So this works quite nicely already, and actually we have a fully working app already. But as I've told you, we want to add the support for the new Spotlight feature. And in order to do that, let me just add a new function here to our quote table view controller, let's say beneath the save quote method, and we will call this function add to Spotlight, of course, Spotlight. And as a parameter, we will have a quote here, which is going to be a dictionary with the known string key value pair, and that's it for the method header. But before we actually can use Spotify, what we need to do is access our our Xcode project and move down to the linked frameworks and libraries. And the first framework we're going to need is the Core Spotlight framework. So we will add that one. And this was quite difficult to find out, actually. We will also need the mobile core services, since in this framework there are some definitions that we're going to use later. So those two frameworks are needed in order for us to work with the Spotify API. Spotlight, not Spotify. Okay, sorry for that. And to use it, actually, we have to scroll at the top of our quote table view controller file and also import the Core Spotlight framework, and we will also import the mobile core services. And let's build that and give this a try. Looks good. All right, now back to our add to Spotlight function. It is actually quite simple to add things to Spotlight. The first thing you need to do is create a so-called attribute set, and therefore we will use a new class which is called CS Core Spotlight Searchable Attribute Set, and we will initialize this with an item content type. And now this is why we needed a mobile core services, because we have to use something like this KUT type, and in our case this would be text, so the type identifier for all text encoded data. And Apple recommends to use these forms of types so that you do not have to specify more information, and we will cast this to a string as it is required. And now all we need to do in our attribute set is to assign a title, which is going to be our quote that we have used as a parameter here, and we access the quote object and use the key for the quote itself, which is going to be the title in our Spotlight search. And also what we need to do is access the attribute set content description, and therefore we can again use the quote and in that case the author key, so that we have the result that you've seen at the beginning of the video in our Spotlight search. And after you have defined such an attribute set for a so-called searchable item, we have to create this searchable item. So search item is going to be a CS searchable item, and we have to initialize it with a unique identifier as a string. And here, this is now the interesting part, and this is why we need the quote index. This is going to be our unique identifier, and then you have to define a domain identifier, which is going to be com training Swift quote in my case. And the last parameter that we have to specify is our attribute set. So this is going to be the attribute set. And now that we have our search item, we need to call another great class that comes with iOS 9, which is CS searchable index. And then we will access the default searchable index. And all we need to do now is index a searchable item. So, and this works quite like a database where you can add things to it. So only what you add to this default searchable index in the form of a searchable item will be displayed in the in Spotlight when the user searches for something. So you can completely control what is searchable and what is not. So as you can see, it requires us to give it an array of CS searchable items. We only have one, so we'll create an array and insert the search item here. And there we have a completion handler where we will state an error, and if the error is not equal to nil, so if something went wrong, would simply print the error and its localized description. No need in that case for the user to see that. And now all we need to do actually is to call our is called add to spotlight. And here we go. So add to spotlight, and there's our quote that we want to add. We will simply use get quote again. And then let's just run that and see what happens. And here we go. There is our application. I press Command Shift H to go to the home screen, and I go to Spotlight, and I type in Brian. I type in Advent. Hello. Oh, right. Of course, this does not work because we have not yet created a quote that is searchable. So let me just add something here, a second quote for real, and save that. And now let's go back to Spotlight and search for Brian. And here we go, a second quote for real. And of course, because we have not added our previous quotes to Spotlight, they did not appear, but in this case they did. But now what happens is when I click on the search result, we will come back to the to our overview, which is not what we want. And to change that, what we need is to make some adjustments to the app delegate, which is actually the place where everything that is handled on application launch is done. So first of all, because we are dealing with Spotlight, we have to import core Spotlight here again. And then we will need to add another delegate method here, which is called application continue user activity. So we continue the user activity of pressing on a search result. So we have to check if our user activity and its activity type is equal to CS searchable item action type. So if this has something to do with a core Spotlight search. And if this is the case, we want to get the identifier from our search, which is going to be our quote index. So the identifier is going to be the user activity, and it's user info, which is a dictionary. And we will then use, we have to unwrap this one, and we will then use the CS searchable item activity identifier key to get our identifier. And then we will use a, let me just return true here, what you have to do in that case. Else, because you see here is the return type is a bool, and we have to return true. And now that we have our identifier, we need to use a notification. So let's use the NS notification center, the default center, and post a notification with the correct method, of course, with a name, which is going to be, let's say, display search result, and the object is going to be our identifier. And this notification has nothing to do with push notifications or remote push notifications, which you can receive on your iPhone. It has something to do with calling another part of your code. And once I post this notification, this is, let's say, this is something like a radio station, and now we have to create a receiver for this radio station that listens for this call of display search result. And therefore, we will go to our overview table view controller. But first of all, let me copy that name here so that I don't make spelling mistakes. And we will add this observer, as it is called, in our viewDidLoad function. So we again use the NS notification center and the default center and add an observer. The observer in that case is our class overview table view controller. The selector, or the function that should be called, is something we have to write. Is going to be display search result, and I add a colon because this function is going to have a parameter. And the name is going to be the name, as you can see, I'm using a capital D here. It's the name of the notification, and this observer here has no object that we need to pass. But now let's add the function that we talked about, or the selector as it is called here, which is nothing else but a function. It will have a parameter, which is going to be the notification itself, which is the NS notification. And we can then use this notification parameter for our search quote index, which we have to define here at the top, which is search quote index. It's going to be an int, integer value. And then we can assign, in that case, the notification and the object that is contained in the notification, and we specified that object here when we gave this post notification function the identifier as a parameter. So let's go back here to our overview tail view controller, and we have to cast this object to an NS string. And we use the NS string class here because it has a great method which is called integer value, and we really want an integer value. And what we need to do then is actually call the segue. So we will use self, our table view controller, and call perform segue with identifier, which is going to be the display quote identifier. The sender is self. And now let's just see if we have to make an adjustment here. So we go to prepare for segue with identifier, and then we need to check here at this point if our search quote index is not equal to nil. So if we have received a quote index from our Spotlight search, then our quote VC is going to get the quote index from the search quote index, and also we will have to supply it with a quote to display from our quotes array and access this one again from the search quote index. And in any other case, so when the user itself presses a button in or onto a cell in our application, we want to do what we always did. So let's just add a comment here. Here's coming from Spotlight, coming from table view. And this should actually do it, so that we can give this a try and run our application. So we are here, press Command-Shift-H, go to Spotlight, maybe search for it again, Brian, hit that, and there we go. A second quote for real. It is directly displayed, and this is, I think, quite cool and really, really useful for many applications that store data, and now you know how to implement this great new iOS 9 feature in your apps, and maybe it has been your first app with iOS 9 or with Swift, and I hope you liked it, and see you soon.